Thanks.
Okay, you're going to share your screen?
I can do that.
You ready to go, Rick?
Whenever you're ready.
Oh yeah, let's go.
All
Maybe you
right.
want to make that Lightroom window full screen.
The Lightroom window is currently full screen.
Okay.
I mean, I can make it wider if you want. It's just this resolution tends to work best for most of the camera clubs that I speak to. If I make it
Okay.
bigger, sometimes people get lost. But the problem I have is I have a very ultra wide screen. It's a 21:9 aspect ratio, and it doesn't project well to other places. So I tend to work in this mode because it fits a lot of people's screens.
Okay. That sounds okay to me.
Okay, are we live right now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Rikk Flohr. I'm a quality engineer, customer advocate at Adobe Systems, and I work in the photography. My responsibilities are Camera Raw, Lightroom Classic, which you're seeing on your screen right now, as well as the Lightroom ecosystem of products, which would include desktop, web, and device-based phones and tablets. And my presentation tonight is called Behind the Mask. It's going to be advanced masking with the new masking features in Lightroom. And I want to say, I'm sorry, what was that?
I would like everybody to mute themselves except Rick. And if you have a question, uh, you put that in the chat window, and I will include that, and there'll be time to ask questions. But
Absolutely.
otherwise, mute yourself.
Yeah, we can stay a little longer if we need to make time for questions too. But I encourage questions. What we're showing today is fairly complex and fairly new, and I'm sure you're going to have some questions, and you may want to ask me to do it again, and that's fine as well. But right now, Adobe is still in lockdown from COVID, and I'm not allowed to present in person at any customer events until December the 31st, and I'm waiting for new guidance as to whether I'll be able to do that in the new year. I know I've been contacted by a lot of clubs, including the Spring Break organization, asking me to commit to presentations. And at this time, my company says I can't do that, so I'm limited to the virtual presentations like we're doing here tonight. And the presentation you're about to see, you're going to be the first club that I've done this for. I'll probably be doing it at several other clubs throughout the remainder of the year, but you guys are the first. So if it feels a little rough, if it feels a little squeaky, that's because I'm running through it for the first time. But in October, Adobe held their annual Max event, which is typically a large convention in LA, but the last 2 years, because of COVID, it's been virtual. And we unveiled a new feature set. Actually, it's a combination of 3 features. In my opinion, is the biggest upgrade to Lightroom since Lightroom went from version 1 to version 2. And in October, we went from version 10 to version 11. And I think that the leap in editing capability and what you can do in Lightroom from version 10 to version 11 is the biggest thing we've had in 9 versions. And that's what I'm going to be showing to you today. So I thought I would start with a Lightroom Classic interface. This is version 11.01, which was released on Monday this week. It's an update to the version that came out in October. And I'm going to take you through some of the new tool functionality, and hopefully we'll get through all of the tools and some real world examples for your editing. So without further ado, I'm going to take this image, and people who've been to my advanced editing classes before, and perhaps even at spring break, may have seen this image before. But this is the image I wanted to talk to you about today because it demonstrates a lot of principles that we can really use. I'm going to hit Develop module, and I've expanded the panels on the right-hand side to be as wide as possible. It's very important that you be able to see what I'm doing in this area right here, and I'm hoping that it shows up well enough on all of your screens. So what we've got here is we've got an image taken down by the Mexican Hat area in southern Utah, northern Arizona. And it's an image that represents, a common problem that people have when they're editing, and they want to edit different parts of the image differently. And in Lightroom in the past, in Camera Raw and in the Lightroom ecosystem products, you had 3 local adjustment tools. You had a brush, you had a graduated filter, and you had a radial filter. And those have all been replaced with a set of tools that's greater functionality. Underneath the histogram on the right, there used to be a brush, a radial, and a graduated filter here next to the red eye correction, the healing, and the crop tool. And those have all been replaced by a single tool called Mask. The first change is those tools that you've become accustomed to using that were under the histogram are now inside of another menu. And if I click masking to open it up, you'll see I have a set of options. I have the traditional brush, linear, and radial gradient that Lightroom has always had. And if you were using the Lightroom Classic product or Camera Raw, anytime you used one of these 3, you also had the option to choose a color range, a luminance range, and in some instances a depth range. What was added that was new in this functionality was 2 new masking capabilities were added: select subject and select sky. And those are both artificial intelligence, machine learning selections that look at your image and say, this is sky, this is the subject. But in addition to that, more power was added to each one of these features by allowing each one of these selections to be modified by any one of the other selections. Take a linear gradient and you could draw it on an image, and we'll just draw this, and I might want to take down the sky intensity just for an example, and I'm over exaggerating it so it shows up well on your screen. And that would be what you would have. And if you wanted to, say, erase it where this pinnacle of rock comes up here, you see how when I pulled the gradient down in the sky, the rock became dark at the top? You had a crude eraser tool, and that was all you had to use. And that was very, very limited in what you can do. I'm going to delete the mask that I just made there. And you had a brush tool, and the brush tool would allow you to paint and edit onto the screen. I could adjust the exposure up, or I could adjust the exposure down, or any one of the other effects in this area. Change the hue drastically of that color if I wanted to. I'll reset that. But those were the only tools you had. You had the radial gradient, you had the graduated filter, and you had the brush. And all that was available to modify each of those was. What we've added now is we've added the ability to let each tool modify a tool. So if I want to, say, make a linear gradient, again, I'm exaggerating this with a negative exposure, and then I want to add to that, I can add any one of these other tools. I can add a radial gradient to the mask. And now as I adjust, you'll see that both masks are working together. I also have the ability to click the subtract button and say, I would like to subtract from that combination of masks a brush stroke. And what this does is this gives you a lot of power. And as I take you through some actual real editing examples, you'll be able to see what happens. But before we do that, I want to take you around this masking panel. So we've got a masking panel that appears here. And this masking panel is unlike any other panel that's ever appeared in Lightroom before, in that you can move it wherever you like. You can actually dock it back into the panel section if you'd like and pull it back out again. I tend to leave it up here in the corner. You also have the ability to collapse it in half if you want to be able to see your entire image. And that's very nice. So going through the nomenclature, we have a mask group. This is the mask group I just created. It consists of a brush that's in negative. I'm hoping you can see the icon here. A graduated filter tool that was in additive mode, and a linear gradient that was in additive mode as well. And between those 3 tools, I've created the mask that I've got on the screen. Now the mask that I've got on the screen is not a very good example of an edit, but I've got some other things I can do. I can show the overlay that tells me where my mask is going to be, and I can change it to any color I want. For example, blue doesn't work really well against a sky, and in the formations I've got here of the red sandstone, red doesn't work very well, so I might pick another color like green to be my mask overlay to show me where I'm painting my mask. And then if I come in here and say I want to brush out some more of the mask, I can do that. You can see instant feedback on that. You can, or you can mouse over the pieces individually and see where each mask is, including the composite mask at the top. Those are all very handy tools. And if I like, I can also say, show me the image on black. And then when I mouse over, I can see black and white where masks appear and where the image shows through. And I've got a whole bunch of other options here, whether I can automatically show pins or not. I can show on white, but I tend to stay in the color overlay mode. That's where I like to live, and I have the overlay typically turned off. And normally I work in overlay is red. That's just where I tend to work, but you'll find me switching it if I'm working on a sunset image where it's difficult to see the masks. So that's the how to get around. The top two tools, Select Subject and Select Sky, are, like I said, artificial intelligence tools, so they're going to actually take some time to work. If I click Select Sky, you'll see I have in the bottom center of the image a Detect Sky property where sky is. And it's done so by making a red mask. If I switch that to black, you can see that this is the area that I'm masking out. All of the area that's black is being masked out, and the sky is now a separate selection. I'll turn off the overlay. Now anything I adjust here is going to affect primarily the sky. And one of the things I like to do is I like to pull the blacks down on my sky. I like to kick the saturation up just a bit and maybe pull the highlights back just a little bit. Now, if you'll notice when I was working on this image and I had it set to image on black and overlay turned on, there's a little bit of my formation showing through. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to refine this mask a little bit by saying subtract, and I'd like to subtract anything that's color range. And for color range, I'm going to pick the red, and it's going to take a huge swath, and it's going to say subtract. That's probably too much. Got to refine slide down. If I don't like what I've done, I can delete any one of these mask components by clicking on the three-dot menu. So that's a very quick example of what I can do with a mask. Let me turn off the overlay, and I'll adjust this pretty much like I normally would. I'll give it a little more saturation. If I want to change the color of the sky, I mean, I can go crazy with it if I like, or I can be subtle with it if I like. And I'll tell you, subtle works a lot better. And I get the sky like I want it. One of the things I can do now that I have this masking control panel in Lightroom is I can right click and I can duplicate that mask. So what I've done is I've duplicated the mask, and now I've got double the effect going on my sky. But I've also got the ability to go in here to this sky and right click on it and say invert. Well, everything but the sky is the ground. So I might actually label this one ground, and I'm double clicking on the names. I'll call this one sky. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't have it double clicked there. We rename and sky so that I can identify my masks, and that's pretty handy to have. I'll reset the effect on the ground by selecting the inverted sky, and I'll say reset by clicking the effect panel, and I'll turn off show overlay, and now all of the adjustments I'm going to do are going to take place just on the ground. And that's a real handy way to do things. I've got the ability now to edit my sky and my ground separately. Now you've also got the ability to come in here and turn off a mask by clicking on the little eyeball that appears in the mask panel. And when I click on that and hold it down, it turns off the mask. Click on that and I can see those masks completely turned off. So I want to look at just the sky. I can come in and say, let me see what I'm doing to the sky, or I can say, let me see everything I'm doing to the ground. In this case, the ground. And I might dial my just a touch. I might give myself some texture, some clarity, really make those striations in the rocks pop a little bit. And then I can turn back on my sky to see how I'm doing. And it does a pretty quick job. Once you get the hang of using these masks, you can do things quite quickly and do them very efficiently. Now this image is really good because if I reset it, I can show you what some of the other tools do. We've got a tool down here called Color Range. We've also got one called Select Subject. If I click Select Subject, the AI is going to work on this and it's going to detect a subject, and you're going to find that it's going to detect just the formation. That's the area it says is the most important part of the picture and something you might want to edit. So I've got that in my arsenal as well. I can select a subject, I can select the sky, I can brush, I can use the linear gradient, the radial gradient, or I can use something called a color range. Color range is handy if I want to select colors from the image. Grab a band of red here, and this is the area that it selects. So those are the areas it's going to edit. Where it's black, I won't get an edit. Where it's not black, I will. With the color range tool, I've got a refine slider that lets me dial it back a little bit or dial it up. And I try to find the sweet spot where I'm getting the most bang for my buck. And then I can start to edit my image, increase my saturation of my reds, maybe pull my blacks down, maybe increase my texture. Of course, I'm exaggerating everything so it shows up good on your screen. And that's another tool in my arsenal. This image works very, very well because I can choose colors. I can come up to the top of the mask panel and I can say I'd like a new mask, and this time I'd also like another color range mask, but this time I want to select blues, and it's going to show me where the blues are. I can choose to select the blues that include more of the clouds or less of the clouds, and if I turn off the overlay, you can see it. I'll turn down the effect that I can actually dial in or out those clouds in real time while I'm watching. I can improve the saturation on them. I can maybe pull the blacks down just a little bit, and I like to give clouds just a little bit of clarity just to make them pop. And very quickly I can go from this image to this image using only color range masks, where before I did similar edits using a sky mask, a copy of the sky mask inverted to show the land. I'm going to reset this image back to 0 again, and I'm going to show you now a tool called Luminance Range. Luminance Range is looking at the blacks and letting you choose how dark or bright the luminance channel is for the effect you're going to place. And you'll see that nothing's happening to begin with. I have an empty mask, and I have a little box here where the tool is that has an exclamation point, and it's because I haven't chosen the luminance range. I can click on a dark area of the photo and got range chosen. You'll see I have a tool in the panel over here that has some slider values. I can say, let me have all of the darks. I can say, let me have this much of the lights. And it will actually mask out the area. And I can control it by setting the endpoints for the effect and the feathers for the effect. The inside box shows me where I'm going to be at 100%. The outside box shows me where I'm going to be at 0%. So I can come out here and I can say, show me everything. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to dial in just the land here, or mostly the land. And I'll say something like this is probably what I would want to get, just so I don't have any sky showing there. And that allows me to have an effect that controls just the land. So we've actually been able to select the land 4 ways. Select subject. We've been able to select it by color. We've been able to select it by luminance, because in this case, than most of the land that's underneath it. And we were able to select the sky and invert it to choose the land. So it gives me another powerful tool that I can use. And the last tool that I haven't talked about yet, I'm going to reset this image once again, and I'm going to choose another image because we've got a tool down at the bottom called Depth Range. And Depth Range is available for very specific images. If you have Lightroom on the phone, and I'm just going to bring my phone up here. This is my phone. This is my darling granddaughter, Arin. And if you have Lightroom on the phone, one of the things you can do is you can capture a picture using what's called depth capture. And if you use depth capture from the Lightroom app on the phone, it creates a depth map for your image, which Lightroom is then capable of using as a mask. So I've done a couple of depth captures in advance so that you guys don't have to watch me fumbling with the phone. I've got a couple here. So we've got, this is called the Adobe Cube. Essentially what it is it's a cell phone holder. It's a little rubber cube. And this is a photo I captured with a depth mask. So you'll see if I come back to the develop module and I enable the masking tool, that now depth mask is a selection that I'm allowed to use in my edit selection. So if I select depth mask, it'll again give me the exclamation point because I haven't chosen a depth. I'm going to say right there is where I would like to pick, and it's going to mask out the area that I'm not going to be affecting. And it's going to give me a tool similar to the Luminance tool over here. I've got a range to say, you know, I want the effect to happen up to here, and I want to affect back to here, and I can kind of slide and say where I would like that mask to take effect. So one of the things I might do is I might use the depth range mask, and I might want to subtract from that depth range mask a color range, which is the countertop. And then I've got a very nice, I could obviously make it a little tighter by pulling a little bit more of that color that only affects the red cube. So if I want to adjust the hue on the red cube, I can adjust it independently of the rest of the picture because I'm using a depth mask that is modified by a color range mask. Now I'm going to do this one again because this is the one that kind of throws people most of the time. So I've got an object here that does have a depth capture mask to it, and I can tell that because depth capture is enabled. If I click depth capture, it's going to ask me to select a depth either by moving these sliders or by clicking somewhere on the image. And I'm just going to grab a swath of the image here, and it's going to say this is my depth mask area. Now, I would like to exclude this front area, and it looks like to me the easy way to exclude it is to subtract whatever color range that is. So I'll select that color range, and it does a pretty nice job. I can dial it back just a little bit, and I get a pretty tight selection. This out there is good. If I turn off the overlay and adjust exposure up or down, you can see that I'm just affecting the cube. I want to change the hue of the cube from Adobe Red to something blue. I can certainly do that, and it allows me to mask very, very quickly. That's a quick rundown of the 7 tools, the 2 new tools, Sky Select, Subject Select, as well as the ability to have a masking panel. So I think I'll pause right there and make sure that anybody doesn't have any questions before we get into some actual image editing.
If you have any questions at this point, go ahead and unmute yourself. Boy, Rikk, this is a lot to absorb. I'm glad we're recording it and I can watch it multiple times.
Yes, it is. And I wanted to say, too, that not only is this available on the desktop software, but the same available on my phone. I mean, oops, I don't want to get a video file in there. That's going to be crazy. So here, we'll just see how this works. I'm going to select masking here, and you'll see that I have a picture of my grandson Ulrich and my daughter Whitney. And I'll click the plus, and you'll see that I have the exact same selections here that I do in the Lightroom Classic interface. I can do a select subject. And what it's going to do is it's going to download the model for select subject the first time because I've never used it. And you see that I've got it preparing for first time use, and that's going to say create. And it will actually analyze the image, and it will pick a subject, and it will highlight it. And it picked my grandson as the subject. So if I were to go to exposure now, you can see that I am just adjusting Ulrich. And this is on my iPhone 11 I'm using this on. It works very, very well. So you're not limited to using this on only your desktop device. You can use it on your tablet. You can use it on your phone. And the Camera Raw software, Lightroom Classic, or the Lightroom desktop software. Did we have any questions come in, Terry?
No, I don't see any yet.
Well, then let's edit some images.
Just over. Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. We'll start with my grandson Ulrich again. So this is a pretty typical picture you'd take this time of year. This is my grandson in my backyard. And one of the things I always tell people is before you start doing local adjustments, make sure you do the global adjustments first. And obviously, I would want to crop out that bright area at the top because it's not important to the story. This is a picture of my grandson, and I don't need to have that bright sunny patch of sky. And it's also got a bad white balance because, of course, it was shot in daylight, and I need to apply a shade white balance to it to make it look a little bit more natural. Now, Ulrich still looks a little cool temperature-wise. If you look at the white diamonds in his sweater, you'll see that they're still a little bit blue, but I've got a good starting point for my image right now. So I'll click on the masking tool to invoke the mask panel, and I'll say, select subject. I want to mask out Ulrich. It will do a little bit of search of my image, and it will attempt to mask Ulrich out from his background. And it did a pretty good job. I'm going to switch my overlay back to color because that's what I'm used to working in, and you can see a little bit better what's going on. The only part of him it missed his shoe here, and it missed a little bit of the blue right here. I could refine that subject just a little bit, and I could say add to the mask a color range, and on that color range I would like to pick the blue. And it picked up a lot of the leaves now. If I move the exposure radically, you can see that there are things in the background that are moving. So I don't necessarily like that. I might refine that a little bit. Let me show the overlay again and just kind of dial it back until it disappears from the leaves. It does not disappear from it. So I've got him selected now. That's a pretty good mask. I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and remove that color range because it's not important for right now. And we'll click that and say delete that. So I've just got the object selection where I said select my subject. First thing I'd like to do is I'd like to duplicate that selection. I'll right click it and say duplicate mask 1. And because it's a good idea, name your layers what you're doing because you want to be able to go back at a later date and realize what things are. And I'll call this one Ulrich. And now I've got 2 layers. And on the top layer, because I want it to be the background, I'm going to do an invert. And when I invert that, you'll see that the mask changes, and now it's everything but Ulrich. So if I want to take that background mask and darken it down a little bit, and maybe make it just a little bit warmer because those leaves are a little more fall-like in color, and I don't know, maybe take the clarity down on them a little bit so they look like they're just a little bit more out of focus. That looks great. I'll go back and select Ulrich now, and I'll make him just a little bit warmer as well. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make these white diamonds in his sweater look like they're white and not blue. And I might give him just a little bit of exposure pop, and I might give him just a little more contrast. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking I'm pretty happy with that. I'll show you the before and after on it. There's the before and there's the after. And if I mouse over these, you can see that's what I did to the background. By clicking the eyeball, that's what I did to the subject. And it's a very, very fast edit. In the olden days, what I would have had to do is I would have had to carefully brush his entire body in order to get that particular mask made. And here I don't have to do that. And it gives me a good matte quality sharp edges, and it's not an easy background. He's got a sweater with lots of different patterns, and he's on leaves that have lots of texture, pattern, and color to them, and it still picked out a pretty quality mask. There are a couple of leaves down here at the bottom that are part of the mask. I could go back and I could paint those out if I chose, but for now I'm just going to leave them like it is because if I were to show this picture to his mother or his grandmother, they would be perfectly happy with that. So one of the things I can do now is I can move in and I can look at his eyes. You can see that he had a lot of food on his face. And that's something that I would probably fix with a healing brush. I might come in and make a smaller healing brush and just paint on Ulrich's food stains and, take those out just a little bit. We'll move it up here and we'll set the opacity a little higher. And that now takes that one out pretty good. Tin feather, now that's not too bad. But I might want to go after his eyes instead. So let's go after his eyes a little bit. I've already got a mask for the background and the full mask. The new mask will be a brush. I'll make the brush small enough to paint inside of his eyes. You can see that it's showing me the brush stroke as I'm painting. And that looks pretty good. I don't have to be too careful here for this example. I'll paint this in. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to make those eyes pop just a little bit. You can see I overpainted. I can hold down the Alt key and I can get an eraser. And I can come back here. And with the brush tool, you always have access to the eraser. So there's my mask. I'll kick the exposure up just a little bit. We'll kick the saturation up just a touch. And I might add a little bit more brown color back into his eyes by kicking the color swatch, and somewhere in there. Now it looks pretty crazy when you look at it at full res, but when you pull back out and I show you the eyes before and after, if it's a little bit too much, one of the things you can do is with this mask panel over here is all these effects sliders into a single effect. I can take that and say, I overdid it, dial it back about 15%, dial it back a little bit more, and I can crank that up and down until it's a very realistic way to go. You just want to remember to expand the panel back again, because if you forget to expand the panel back again, what'll happen is you'll draw a new mask, and I'll just make a big ugly brush stroke here, and then you'll go to adjust it, and you'll adjust your whole image because you're using the basic panel now instead of the actual local adjustment panels right here. And we get that request a lot in our support forums, is why is my local adjustment adjusting the whole image instead of just the area I painted? That's because you've collapsed and scrolled down to the basic panel and you're using the wrong set of sliders. So that's a quick edit on Ulrich's photo right there. I'll pause there in case anybody's got a question or wants to see something again. If you have nothing, Terry, let me know.
Rikk, what was it? Yeah, what was it that you just did? Where was it that you clicked to kind of get that back to that one part and not do that? It looked like a little diamond there in the corner, or a little
Right, yes. So anytime you have a local adjustment that you paint on an image, there's a panel that appears. And the panel will have all of the edits. You can see that they're a lighter gray than the rest that you can do with the local adjustment. But if you're going to dial back an adjustment, you collapse the panel hitting this little triangle here, and that gives you a slider that lets you dial in and out the whole adjustment. And if you do that, you have to click it. We call it a disclosure triangle, and it will expand the panel again. And you can see that there's one here for the brushes as well, where you contract it and it only shows size, but when you expand it, it shows a feather, a flow, and a density control, as well as auto mask. And you'll find those all sharpening panel, the detail panel, for example. There's a disclosure triangle there that lets you see a preview. So you want to be on the watch out for those, because a lot of people will collapse things and forget that they've done so. And then when they come back, they can't figure out why things aren't working. But it's typically always the right-hand side of the panel, and it will be a white triangle that you'll click on, and it will expand the panel. Does that answer you?
Yes, sir. I think you're a genius when it comes to this stuff. I don't know anybody else that knows as much as you that can.
Well, this is my day job too. So I mean, basically, I spend my day listening to what customers say, testing to reproduce their bugs, and then in my spare time, I test the software. So
Okay, I
Go
do
ahead.
have a couple more questions.
Okay, great.
How do you get the depth sensitivity in the subject photo?
The depth sensitivity. So when I took this photo, I had a camera to do that, and the Apple software inside my phone actually builds the depth map in. So that's not something that I do in Lightroom. That's not something I do in my phone capture. I just say on my phone when I'm here, let me get out of the masking area. Discard changes, back out. When I get here and I use the Lightroom camera app, most people are working in automatic mode, or they're working in professional mode or high dynamic range. If I select depth capture, what it does is it accesses some Apple software. An API is what they call it, an application programming interface that allows Lightroom's camera to take advantage of any depth information that Apple records, and it saves that into the file. Once that's been saved into a file, Lightroom is smart enough over here to read that there's depth map information available and highlight this box. And once I highlight the box, that depth information already lives in the file. I just have to tell Lightroom how much of it I want to use. And that's how it gets in there. So, I would set it somewhere right about that edge of the image, maybe just a little bit further back. This is where the red color doesn't work real well for me, so I might switch to a green overlay instead. And I can tell what's going on. That way I can see if I get green bleeding into there. And I can come from the forward side Sorry, I need to do this. Like, see, if I want to just have the tabletop, I can just have the tabletop too. Excuse me. And I can also click on the object to say, I want this to be my depth area that I'm working on as well. So basically it lets me pick and choose, but all of that's done by the camera inside the device. I don't get the ability to select that.
Okay, could you also demonstrate how to inverse or invert a mask?
Absolutely. So I've got a mask here, depth range. I can group. A mask group can contain the original mask and any additions and subtractions I want to do to it. So I have to click on that group and I can go into the mask inside of it called depth range. If I right click, I will get a menu that allows me to invert, intersect, duplicate, hide, delete, or copy or paste. In my case, I want to invert, so I hit the invert and it chooses the opposite of what's selected. You can also get that from the 3-dot menu over here. I just prefer to right click, but if you go to the 3-dot menu, it has the exact same options. Set that image. Okay. Did you have another question?
That should do it.
Okay. Now that question just brought up a very, very good point. There was an item in there that I didn't really talk about yet. So if I have a brush stroke like this, and I paint a big old green brush stroke, and see what I did. If I want to intersect that with a color mask, say for example, I can right click and I can say intersect with color range. And then I can pick a color range on my image. So what I've told Lightroom to do is it says anywhere this brush stroke matches this color range, I want you to create a mask. So it's an intersect function, and you can intersect anything with anything else. So I can intersect a color range with a brush stroke. I can intersect a gradient with a linear gradient if I want to. So just another example of that, if I reset this and I say, give me a radial gradient, there's my radial gradient. We'll put it over the object and we'll decrease the exposure. And then I would like to intersect that with a brush stroke. So I'm going to say only apply this where the brush stroke is. And it brush strokes that only overlap the original gradient. That's called an intersect function, and that's very, very powerful. You can do a lot of things with the intersect function. Common uses for the intersect function are face retouching. I might say, give me an area that's really bright, a luminance mask, and intersect it with a skin tone so that I'm only adjusting a highlight on the skin. And that would be a real good example of an intersect mask. And I've got one of those here. Portrait retouching takes a long time, so I didn't want to retouch this portrait for you, but I can show you an example here. If I hit the before after key, go to develop. Oops, I lost my pitch. There it is. And I hit the before after. It'll take it a second here. There we go. While I'm young, Rick. Here. This is the set of maps I've created for this particular image. I've got a face skin smooth. I've got a face highlights. I've got pupils. I've got specular highlights in the eye, shadows in the hair I've adjusted, the forehead hotspot that I've adjusted. And if you look at that, it's just a brush stroke. The shoulder I've darkened, the neck I've darkened, the eyes I've whitened. I've removed the red blush from the color. And if I click on the red brush, you'll see that it's actually a color range with a subtractive mask. I've softened the outside edges of the image by using a radial gradient and a dehaze and declarity. And I've sharpened the eyes. And all of those masks together allow me to essentially go from that, which was the capture, to that. So you can do a pretty professional skin retouch on this. And this is one of those places where you can use a lot of masks. So this highlight right here is a problem that I might want to fix. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to turn on the masks, and I'm going to save this as a snapshot just so that I can get back to it. And then I'm going to reset the whole image. So if I wanted to get this highlight right here, what I might do is I might say, give me a brush stroke that shows me that area. And then I'd like to take and I'd like to intersect that brush stroke with just a luminance range mask. And the luminance range I want to get is this little area right here. So I'll draw that, and as I shrink and expand this area, you can see the mask shrink and expand on her face. And it allows me to very, very tightly select an area. I'll turn off the overlay, and then I'll just dial back the exposure. And you can see obviously what I'm doing there. And I'll just come back just a little bit. I might just take a little bit off of the whites just to pull it back in. And it gives me the ability to have very fine control. But that's the end. So I can add a mask. I can add to the mask I've just added, or I can subtract from the mask I've just added, or I can do an intersection of two masks. And one of the easiest ways to see an intersection between two masks is for me to get a big nondescript image like this cloud and draw two radial gradients on here. So we'll draw a radial gradient. First, I'll update the process version. So I'll draw a radial gradient, and I'm going to hold down the shift key so I get a perfectly round one, and then I'm going to move it down here. And I can still control the feather of the gradient to make it very, very sharp if I would like, or make it very, very amorphous if I would like. But I can also duplicate this gradient. And one of the things I'm not showing is I'm not showing the pins. So I'm going to say show the pins always, so you can see the traditional pins that we've had before. One of the problems Lightroom used to have is if you would duplicate a gradient and you would put it right over the top of the other one, you couldn't select the one underneath because you couldn't grab that. Now, because they're different items in a menu over here, you can grab whichever one you like. But if I pull this gradient out here, you can see that I have two circles, one over the top of the other. If I say add to the existing mask with a linear gradient, and I add, I'm sorry, I didn't want to do a linear gradient. I wanted to do another radial gradient. So let me undo that. Escape, Control Z, and I wanted to get rid of this mask right here. So there we are. So if I wanted to add to this, I could add another radial gradient to it, and I could position that wherever I like. And now I've got a mask that's essentially a figure 8. Looks like that. I could also delete that mask, and I could say subtract from this mask. So I'm going to say give me a subtract, and I'm going to do the same radial gradient again. And now you can see that I'm subtracting from the mask with a second radial gradient. If I delete that and I say I would like you to intersect with a radial gradient instead, and I draw a radial gradient, you can see that it's only the areas where they overlap that's chosen. So that's the difference between add, subtract, and intersect. It gives you a lot of power to work with things. Like, for example, I've got this entire image here. I might select the color range and say I would like blue, and it will show me where blue is. And I can say refine that so that I get my wispy clouds back. And now I can just adjust the blue. We'll say change the sky color to a different color, green. And now I find that I want to filter it into these clouds a little bit more. So I could do that by adding more color range. I can add the same color range back in over the top. And then I could say subtract just the brightest whites. And now I've got just the brightest whites selected. I can raise those up, and very, very quickly I can dissect different parts of the image. On that original image that we worked on, the stone formation right here, that's one of the things I can do that I don't often do is I might say, let me go to develop and select the sky. Select sky. We'll let it go through its thing. It recalculates each time you go in. So if you make changes to your image, it will give you a different sky mask than what you had before. And I might want to subtract a color range and subtract, all this red stone. Grab it there. And then I might say, I would like to subtract a luminance range and say, give me the brightest whites back. And if I can't see what I'm doing, I'll turn off my overlay. And this looks like the bright white area. And now I've just got the blue areas selected. So if I turn off my overlay again and turn my exposure down, I'm actually adjusting the sky without adjusting the clouds. So the ability to dissect different parts of that. In this case, it was a sky selection with a color range, subtract, and a luminance range, subtract. Color range to subtract any of the orange mountains I had, and a luminance range to take the brightest parts of the sky. And in each case, I've got a filtering tool that allows me to dial that in further. Let me do some more heavy adjustments so you can see the filtering tool work. You can see that it does allow me to feather that in. I might choose a very high value here, and then for luminance range, I would probably choose a very high value as well. And then I would just say, give me a little bit more of a natural adjustment, a little more saturation, and maybe just pull the blacks down a little bit. Maybe just a little bit of clarity, and that's a sky I'm much happier with. You can see the before and after on that sky. And it's even picking up this cloud on the horizon here. This cloud down here is always picked up, and that's something nice. It recognizes that cloud there and treats it just like sky. And go to 300%, you'll see that there's a lot of noise in the sky. If I were to come in, I'm going to zoom in really right here so you can see the rock and the sky side by side. This is a nice opportunity for me to increase noise reduction in just the sky and make it more or less go away. We're looking at it at 300%. I'll drop it to 100%. And now I can adjust my noise independent of my rock. And I'm not sure if that shows up very well on your video broadcast. I'll try to make it obvious. But it gives me the ability to adjust the noise out of my sky. Maybe take it down a little bit, maybe take the texture out of it a little bit, maybe even take some of the sharpness out of the sky as well without affecting my rock. If I come up here and I toggle that mask on and off, you can see that I'm not affecting the sharpness of the rock, but I'm affecting the amount of noise in the sky. I'll pause there again, Terry.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay, great. So let's get to some real world images. What can we do in the real world? Everybody likes taking pictures of flowers, right? So obviously I would look at the flower. The flower is an object. It's a subject. It's on a very nondescript background. So one of the first things I might try to do is use the select subject. And if I use select subject, it does a pretty good job of picking out the flower. It'll take it just a second here. And there we are. If I change the overlay color to something other than green, you'll probably see that it's a little bit easier to pick. There we go. So there's the flower. If I change the exposure, we're getting just the flower. Very nice adjustment. I can do whatever I like with that. One of the things I might like to do is I might like to adjust the whites up on the flower. And I can watch histogram up here, and I can, when I'm blowing out detail, and I can pull that slider back a little bit. If you look in the middle of the photo, you'll see, oh, I didn't want to zoom in that far. Let's go to 100%. You can see that I've got a bright specular highlight here from my flash, where I've actually lost some detail in the flower here. And that might be something that I would put back with maybe a brush. So we'll add a brush, and I'll make it small, and we'll just put it over that area right there. And I'll say, I just want to adjust the brightest of the brush. So I'm going to say intersect that with a luminance mask, and then I'm going to sample right there and say, I just want those brightest parts of the image, and that will dial back a little bit right there. And then I can actually pull that back just a little bit. And I'm going to hide those pins so you can see what I'm doing. Show pins. I'm going to show them never. And now if I pull this down, you can see that's the area I'm on. If I pull it back just a little bit, it starts to get a dark haze to it. So I'm just going to pull the whites back ever so slightly, just to where I can see that detail. And then I can see where I've taken that specular highlight out. I might just come up just a little bit more on it, just like that, because I'm just wanting to make that little burn of the flash come out. I might want to go after the purples. Select the purples. I'm sorry, I didn't get my mask there. Color range, select purples. And now I can adjust those purples. And if I've got too much purple, like the background has some purple, I might dial it back a little bit. And then I can change the hue on just that portion of the plant. Works very, very well. If I wanted to change, just select the whites area. I could do a color range mask and select that as well. color range. Select that. And it's probably going to give me a big selection. So I'm going to dial it back the sensitivity a little bit so I just have mostly the whites on the flag. Pick those up for exposure. If I'm getting a little bit of detail lost, I'll pull it back a little bit and we can see the before and after. Very, very subtle adjustments, but we were capable of making them very, very precisely. Now, one of the things I didn't show you was what happens if there's more than one subject. We showed you Ulrich in the leaves. We showed you a flower on a nondescript background. Now let's show you Arn and Ava, my two granddaughters, and what select subject does with them. So, as always, I would probably correct lighting on this first, change it to shade, and I might even sample off of Arn's white shirt here. That's a little bit too much for me, so I'll probably go back to the shade white balance setting that I had. Now you can see that Arn's mom is just off screen here with her arm underneath the leaves holding Arn up because she's not old enough to sit up by herself. So what will happen when I choose select subject, mom in the picture? It's going to do its calculation and it's going to look at the entire scene. I've got two separate subjects and a third thing that's not a subject but is probably very similar to the engine. And you'll see that it actually picks out the two kids pretty good. It grabs some extra leaves in Ava's lap here, and it misses a little bit of her knuckles right here. So I might come back in and say I'd like to add with a brush stroke just a little bit of knuckling here, just to make sure I get it. Looks good there. And it picked up a little bit of a leaf back behind here, so I might go after that as well. And I might say I'd like to subtract a brush stroke as well and come in here and go after some of these leaves that are in her lap. And once I've got that, then I've got the ability to adjust those guys on their own. Maybe give them a little bit more punch. Maybe give them a little bit more warmer temperature. And you'll notice I didn't have to worry about mom over here because she wasn't picked by the AI. And if she was, I could have subtracted her easily with the brush stroke. So I might actually come in here and say, okay, let's duplicate this subject. I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to duplicate the mask above it. And now I want to take out those brush strokes because those brush strokes were to correct the mask I'd done before. So I'll delete those, delete brush 2, delete brush 1. Now I've got a subject. I'm going to invert that subject so that instead of the subject, I have the background. We'll pull that back a little bit, maybe pull the saturation back a little bit. And that's not looking too bad. Nice thing to do would be maybe to crop mom out of the shot. Bring it in tight on just the two little girls. And that's the before and the after with multiple persons in the shot. Any questions there? How are we looking, Terry?
Really good.
Doing
No
good.
question.
Okay. No questions. All right. So here's an example of something. What happens when you have a sky select and there's a hole and the sky is showing through somewhere else? This is an archway down at, I think this is Valley of Fire State Park in Nevada, if I remember right. So we're going to update the process version because this is an old image. And I'm going to do a select sky just to see how it does. It calculates, it calculates, it calculates. And everything's looking pretty good. And by golly, it got all the sky. If I do the exposure slider, you can see that it works very, very well. And that's kind of nice. It's pretty cool. I've got that mask there and it's already created. Now let's say I wanted to make a composite. Let's say I wanted to put this cloud in this image. One of the things I might do is I might send this to Photoshop to do that composite. Open as a smart object in Photoshop. And when I do that, Photoshop will have this photo in Photoshop with the actual mask intact. It's going to open it as a smart object in Camera Raw, and it will have that mask that I've created here. Even though I could create it in Camera Raw, it will remember the mask and it will let me create it. So we'll give it just a second here. I probably should have opened Photoshop once. It looks like it's going to open way too large, but that's okay. I'll grab it, slide it, and do a maximize window on it, and there we are. So now I've got this. If I double click it, it will open the Camera Raw window. And if I click on the masking tool in Camera Raw, you'll see that my Select Sky mask from Lightroom is intact. So I can go backwards and forth from Photoshop to Lightroom and keep my mask. So that's great. I'm going to say, yes, I would like to cancel the changes in Camera Raw. So now I'm going to bring in the sky that I had before. And I'm going to say Edit In. And I'm going to open it as a smart object in Photoshop as well. That leaves me the ability to have it as a raw file. And now I've got this really nice sky that I might want to drop in this shot right here. And they're the same size image. They were taking the same size camera, but you see that I don't get the masking ability. To do a composite, I still have to create a mask. So one of the things I might do is I might come into here and I might say, select sky. So now I'm selecting sky in the Photoshop version of the file, the rendered file, rather than the actual raw file that's sitting here in Camera Raw. I'll create a mask for that. I'll invert that mask, and then I'll turn on the sky again, and we'll switch their positions. Just that quickly, I've got a composite that I can use. Or if I wanted to move this sky around a little bit, grab this one, move it around a little bit, and place it somewhat differently in the frame. I could do that as well. If I had a much smaller cloud, it'd be a little bit easier, but I've got to watch my edges here. And that gives you the ability to composite as well and still go back and still take advantage by double clicking on this raw file and saying, okay, now I'd like to adjust those reds down. My mask is still intact inside of Camera Raw. I can duplicate it. I can invert it. Now I'm working on everything but that. I can bring down some and change the color. Maybe I want it to be a little redder, something like that, just to show you an example, and it will come back and it will render that. So if you're working on composites, you're working on many different layers in Photoshop, and you bring those items in from Lightroom, you can do all of your masking and everything in Light accessible to you in Photoshop. And that's how I do a lot of my composite work. One of the things I might have done is I might have taken these two images and let's just say put these into reference mode. That's the wrong shortcut key, Rick. You need to go to Develop, and I need to get the toolbar here, and I need to put what's called reference mode on. And reference mode will allow me to put two images side by side. So I'll say I want to pull up this one. I want to make this one the active image. And I want to drop this one. I need to select only one of them. Drop this one into here. Drop this one into here. And I might want to adjust the blue of the sky to be similar to the blue here before I send them over to Photoshop for composites. So I can bring them in here. I could hit the button and I could come in here to the blue and I could say, pull the saturation down on the blue. Maybe pull the luminance up just a little bit, and I can make them match a lot closer so that if I wanted to move this cloud around in the scene, I could do that. And it would give me a really nice advantage to send those over there. And then when I send this file to Camera Raw now inside of Photoshop, it will have all of these edits and my blues will match. If I go back to Photoshop, you can see that the blues do not really match one another. They're very, very different in tone. So that allows me to match things in Lightroom, get my edits like I want them, send them to Photoshop, and then I can make a realistic match. Just one of the side benefits of masking is that those masking follows everything around. If I go to an image on my phone that I've worked on in masking, those masks will be translated to my phone as well. Get out of reference view here, and you'll see. So this is pretty much a typical North Shore scene. This is the top of Ilgan Falls. Remember what I said about developing images first? Let me get out of reference view. And there we are. So I want to do a couple of things here first. I want to make the sky better, but I want to give myself a little bit of advantage by making the sky better before I go to do local adjustments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at the lens corrections and make sure chromatic aberration is turned off. On wide angle lenses, when you have chromatic aberration, we'll zoom in really far here. On the edges of frames and high contrast areas, if I turn off chromatic aberration, you'll see that I have a lot of fringing going on. And if I want to get a good mask, I want to turn the fringing off. So I'll kick the chromatic aberration, and I might even go to manual here and say, you know, there's a little bit of purple fringing here too. Let's grab that as well. It is crisp and clean. Then I'll take a look at the profile for the lens. We zoom back out. And on the profile in the lens, I don't know if I like it better with the lens profile or without. I think I'm going to go without. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've got a lot of white sky here. I'm going to go after that with a local global adjustment and pull the highlights back until I'm not clipping any highlights before I was. See if I just go up a little bit, you can see that the sky is almost blown out. If I pull those highlights back, you can start to see some details in the clouds here. And that's going to make my image much, much easier to adjust when I go into sky settings. I want to point out here, you always want to do your dust spot removal before you do an AI selection. So I want to remove that dust spot now. And I know I've got some on the other side of the image as well, because if I don't remove them now and I do the sky selection and try to remove them, I know that I'm going to have issues with those dust spots showing through. So I always want to grab those dust spots on the front end. Here's an eyelash. Let's see, what else have I got here? There's probably one more. Usually is. I usually miss one. Here it is right here. Okay, so there we are. So we've removed our dust spots now. Now I can go after a local adjustment and say choose sky. Interestingly enough, if I say select subject, it does pick the waterfall here, but it's not important for this edit, so we won't worry about it. I select the sky. I've got a nice sky selection here. I'm going to move this down to the bottom so it's out of the way, and I'm just going to pull back on the exposure just a little bit. You can see I get a pretty good sky without getting any artifacts here. And if I toggle this adjustment on and off on the masks, you'll see that it's happening between all of these tree branches in here. That has been selected as sky. Mouse over it, you can see it's pull off its sky. If I go crazy with the adjustment and try to pull it down, let me get back up here and select the mask, and I try to pull it down too far, I might start to see some artifacts along the edges. Tree branches are notorious for being very difficult to mask, and especially near the edges. As long as I don't go too crazy with it, probably about right there is where it's going to lose integrity. And that's at 100% on the very edge of a very tough frame. So if we want to see before and after on this image, right now, just what we've done with the sky, that's what we were able to get back using a judicious amount of global adjustment along with a little bit of local adjustment and a select sky AI. And I might even pull it back a little bit from there. Maybe I went a little bit overboard. I'd like these trees to pop a little bit more. So that looks like a good place to choose a color selection. I'll create a new mask. Range. I'll just grab some greens in there. And you can see it selects a lot of stuff. That's what my refine slider is for. Pull it back until I just kind of have the greens and the trees. And if I don't get it back to where I want it, I might sample another spot and just pull it up until I have the area I want. Now I've got most of my greens, so I might kick the exposure a little bit. That might be too much. Pull the blacks back down to give it some contrast, and then I can control the hue. Make them a little more blue, a little more yellow, whatever I would like to do. Next part I'd like to go after is this rock in the foreground. It's got some great red colors here. Looks like, because I said the word color, color range is another mask I could choose. I'll just select a little bit of reds. You can see it pre-selects the image for me. I'll dial it back ever so slightly so that I'm losing these reds that are in my nice white water. And now I'm going to pull the blacks down on that just to bring those in, and I might kick that saturation just a touch and make those red rocks pop. Now if I move away from this image to this image and then come back, I deliberately went to a black and white image to reset your color. You look at this, you don't see that there's a lot of adjustments that have been done to it. But if we look at the before and after, the greens have changed, the reds have changed, and the skies have changed quite a bit. And that's a pretty good example of a North Shore image and what are the things you could do with it. You could do your dodging and your burning. There's some areas down here that I'd really like to bring up. So maybe what I would do is I would do a brush stroke. I would say, give me a brush stroke and make it a little bit bigger. And I'll just paint really loosely because I know I can refine that mask. And I'll say I'd like to intersect with a luminance range, and I just want to pick the darkest tones. So I'll pick some tones. I'll dial those tones back a little bit, dial them back. I just want to bring up the darkest tones in the bunch if I can. And there I'm able to kind of select what I want. And I say, that's kind of the darkest stuff. I want to bring that exposure up on that area just a little bit. If I crank it, you can see what I'm doing. It's just way too much, but I might push the shadows a little bit. Might be just a little bit too much, but it lets me subtly adjust those. And if I turn that on and off, you can see that you're picking up detail in that area. That detail probably needs some clarity in order to sharpen it up and maybe a little bit of texture. And then I could come back and I could paint this area underneath this rock if I wanted to. I could take the areas of the waterfall. In fact, let's do that. Let's go ahead and say select subject. And I'm hoping it's going to pick out the whites of the waterfall. If it doesn't, I can always delete the mask. Here's the area it's select. Perfect. That's what I wanted. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that white area that's been selected and I'd like to maybe bump the whites on it to push it just a little bit, just about to where it's going to blow. And then I might take some of the saturation out to pull out some of that iron rich color that's there. I could even add a little bit of blue to my temperature and get a very nice water there. And if I look, there's the waterfall. And if we go before and after on the whole image, that's the kind of adjustments we can do with pretty incredible precision. Pause there for questions.
I don't have any more questions here, but this is just blowing my mind.
So what could be more iconic than working on an image of Split Rock Lighthouse, right? This is Split Rock Lighthouse at Moonrise. So just kind of experimenting around here. Let's see what happens if we get a sky. And we say select sky. That's a pretty good selection for one click, you got to admit. So if I zoom in, you can see that the area inside the lighthouse has been picked. It also got these frames around the window here. I'm not too concerned about that, but just be aware of it. And it did a pretty good job on the trees as well. I didn't take the time to do the chromatic aberration correction or check to make anything, but it also skipped the moon. If you'll look at the mask, when I turn on and off the overlay, the moon is not selected. So it did a pretty good job. It did pick out some water. If I wanted to say subtract, I could grab a brush and I could make that brush very sharp. And I could say click, and then I can say shift click. And when I shift click, it draws a straight line, and I'm able to select that all out in one shot. And that's a neat little trick you can use, is when you're using the brush, anytime you have the brush, if you click and then shift click, it will draw a straight line. So I drew a straight line along the horizon to deselect whatever little bits of water were picked up by the sky selection tool. And if I'd been careful, I would have probably straightened this image. It runs a little bit uphill to the right. And now I've got the ability to adjust that sky with whatever I would like. I'd probably pull the highlights back on it just a little bit, maybe bump the texture and the clarity just a touch, just to give the clouds a little bit more definition. And that's pretty good. I'll duplicate that mask by right-clicking and saying duplicate. And this time, I don't want the brush, so I'm going to delete that. Say delete brush. And then I'm going to invert the sky, which should give me the ground. And if I look at that, you can see, well, I've got the ground, but I also got the moon. So I'd probably want to subtract the moon. Do the stroke and just say subtract the moon. Now I can do whatever I like with the ground. I can let me turn off that clipping warning. Maybe I want to make it really, really dark with less contrast. Maybe blue it up a little bit so it looks like it's nighttime. And I'm able to really adjust anything I would like to do here independently. You'll see the lighthouse is adjusting, but that when I turn on and off the sky, the darkness actually falls through the windows on the lighthouse, and that's kind of nice too. If I wanted to brighten up those whites on the lighthouse paint, I could probably come back and say, give me a color range or a luminance range, probably a luminance range mask. So what I'll do is I'll say I want to paint a brush stroke here, and I want you to just intersect that anywhere that there is bright luminance. And I'll just click to get my luminance right there. And then these controls back. I might have to pull it down just a little bit to where I just have the area that I want. And that's pretty close right there. We'll say that's good because you don't need to watch me fine tune. And I can adjust just the whites of the lighthouse. And if I play with these settings just a little bit longer, I'll probably get a pretty good deal. If I find to go overboard, I can click on the disclosure triangle and I can dial back the amount of the effect until it's believable, probably somewhere in there. And that looks pretty good. So there's a couple of examples of common Minnesota scenes that you might see. And what we did here was pretty subtle. I'll collapse the mask group and show you before and after. You can see it's that before that's what we had. After that's what we had. A much nicer, softer scene. So you can go either way with it, either radically contrast, saturation, crispy, or you can make them much more subtle. Now this is the image I have a lot of fun with. This is an actual shot of Devil's Tower at sunrise. I'm up on Johnner Point on this particular one. If you're ever looking for the road, this is a great place to shoot the sunrise. And it's a pretty good capture. The image is reset. So what I might do here is I might say, give me a select object. Let's see if it's really good at picking out the subject. Does it know what my subject is? And it picks the tower, and it didn't do too badly. I would have to say that's a pretty good job of picking the tower. Now I might want to say subtract. Let me expand my mask panel here. I might say subtract those really, really dark tones. And I'll just select some here. And that did a pretty good job too, but I might want to subtract a brush stroke as well so I can take out this lower tree as well. So now I've got just the tower essentially selected. That looks pretty good. Or adjust, but it's kind of hard to look at the tower out of context. I want to increase its exposure and I want to give it some clarity so that it pops a little bit. And I might make it a little warmer because it's sunrise. I'll just pull it up until it feels better for me. Okay. Now we'll do our sky select. Select the mask, plus, select sky. It'll do its thinking, and it will do this each time you recalculate the sky. If you come back to an image after you've done the sky, it doesn't have to recalculate it. We'll kick the exposure down here and maybe pull those highlights back until I see those red lines disappear. Pull the whites down a little bit and adjust the white balance to give it a little more warmth. And maybe just pull the blacks down just to give it some texture to the sky. So that's pretty nice. So right now I'm going to say we've got the sky. I'm going to duplicate that mask. The sky mask that I just did being doubled, but I'm going to invert it on the second mask. And now I've got my ground. Now I might want to subtract my select subject. Then it's going to redetect. I'm sorry, I hit the select sky by accident. That was my fault. I argued with the programmers on this, but wait till it's done, Rick. Actually, I've got a cancel button there. I could cancel it. I might have just locked up the software, but I did. I crashed the software, and very nice. I always love live demos for that reason. Okay, let's go back in. We'll see if it remembered where I was. But for me, select sky and select subject aren't in alphabetical order in the masking menu, so I always grab them wrongly. So let's go back here, get here. All right, did it remember where I was? Okay, so I've got that right there. It looks remembered everything except the invert here. So I've got this. I want to invert. I've done that. Then I want to reset the effect. So that should reset the effect on the ground. And there we are. Okay. So now I've got the ground selected here. And if I was really smart, I would rename it so I could tell what I was doing. That's the ground. And I might say the exposure needs to come up a little bit on that. Maybe warm it up a little bit. It is sunrise. And maybe push some of those shadows just a little. That's maybe too much. And pull in the blacks just a little bit like that. When we're looking at that from a before and after standpoint, that's essentially a select subject, select sky, invert the select sky, and you end up with the mask. And if I needed to, I could actually come back to this select the Devil's Tower, click on the mask to expand it. And if I wanted to subtract a little bit more with a brush stroke, I'll put a little more feather on my brush. And I'll slow down so it's only taken about half of it off. I could actually shade the back side of the tower a little bit with my brush stroke, and then I get a much more natural looking image. And that's a pretty typical image for me, the type of edit that I would normally like to do. I might come in and do some additional global things to it. You know, I've got a particular vignette that I like to apply, and I've got an effect called Sunset Glow that boosts the highlights into a yellow color, but it gives me a really nice before and after image. Let's see, what else do I have here that I wanted to show as a demo? Yeah, we'll go with the leaf. Okay, so here's the leaf. Leaf on a rock in the middle of a stream. The stream is the Caribou River on the North Shore, and the leaf was placed there by the photographer as a setup. So right here, I might say I want that leaf to be a different color. Probably use the word color. I'll pick a color range, select that color range, and you'll see that I get this, but you'll also see that I get some areas inside the rock. I could now say, I want just this thing right here. So how about if I were to intersect that with a brush stroke? And I can say, just apply that right here. Don't apply it anywhere else. Now I've got my leaf selected. I can do a shift on it, make it whatever color I would like. And if I miss out on a little bit of the leaf area right there, I've still got my color range control that I can drag up and down in order to select more or less leaf. Gives me a very nice ability to do some things with it. If I want to, I can take a mask and I can actually pick up and move it. If I turn the pins back on so you can see the pins, and I say always, you can actually grab a brush stroke and you can actually move a brush stroke if you want to. Let me start with a regular brush stroke to do that. So I'll create a mask. I'll add a brush. I've got a pen. I can grab that brush stroke and move it wherever I would like. So if you're like retouching someone's eyes and you copy the masks from one photo to another, which is possible to do, you can then readjust that mask that you had done on their eyes from one photo to the next because the masks are all movable. And one thing that you couldn't do in the former version of Lightroom is you could not invert a brush stroke, and that's a really nice thing to have. So if I select the brush stroke, I can invert it. Now I've got everything but the brush stroke, and I can move the inversion around. So very, very handy. It's very, very powerful, but you have to get your head around all the different ways that you can combine these things to make them work with one another. All right, we are at the 7:54 mark. Terry, what's our question pool looking like?
I don't see any more questions right now, but I'm just kind of blown away by the fact you can move a brushstroke around, and you know, with that mask panel, it's like you've got layers in Lightroom. I thought you only had layers in Photoshop.
Yeah, you know, you can't do the compositing. I can't put two different pictures together, which is something I can do in layers in Photoshop, but it is very layer-esque in the way that it works. And it's incredibly powerful because everything can add to or subtract from everything else. And if you can figure out a way to make it do what you want, and then use the dialing controls for the luminance, the color range, or whatever, the depth range, mask, all those things where you have range controls, you can really dial things in very, very quickly to a very, very precise amount of detail.
Okay, I've got a question here. One of our members said, I've never used Lightroom. I only have an old version of Photoshop. Do you need to purchase it separately for PC, phone? What is your favorite feature of this program?
Well, for Lightroom itself, Lightroom itself is an image management tool. It allows me to manage. This catalog is only 21 images in size, but the catalog that I normally manage is 389,000 images in size. So it allows me to organize, find, and do the edits to them. And with Lightroom, you also get Photoshop. If you buy Lightroom Classic, the program that's on the screen now, and it's a subscription model. It's not a purchase of a license. You actually subscribe on a month-by-month basis. It's $9.99 per month. You get the latest version of Photoshop with that. So you get both tools. And both tools have this masking capability. And if you do that, then you get access to the mobile tools for Android or iOS, iPad, tablets, phones, whatever you'd like to put it on, all of those things back and forth. And the nice thing is that these things will sync with one another as well. You'll see there's a collection here. It's called All Synced Photos. My catalog syncs with my phone. So I've got 30,000 of my images on my catalog of my 380,000 images that actually sync to my phone, sync to my iPad, sync to the web, sync wherever I would like to have them. So it's really a cradle to grave. It handles the import of your photos from your camera, from all of your mobile devices, puts them into a single catalog where you can find them again, organize them again, arrange them into collections, build books, build slideshows, print from this program, build websites, whatever you'd like to do with your output. And then it allows you basically best-in-class editing tools for all of these particular images. And the edits that you do are non-destructive. I can go back to any image at any time, and I can reset it completely. And when I reset it, I also have the ability to restore it because I can store things like snapshots. Here's my masked edit. Here's my edit from here. I could reset this image to 0, create a new snapshot and say, reset image. And I could crop it to, say, square. And I could save that and I could make it black and white. And I could say, this is a square black and white. But the thing is I've still only got one image on disk. I've just got 4 different ways that I've edited that I could return back to in any time. So it's a very powerful organizational and editing tool. And part of the package, you get the full version of Photoshop with it, which means you have all of the incredible retouching and design tools that are available there as well.
Okay, another question. What is the difference between Camera Raw and Photoshop?
Okay, Camera Raw is a plugin inside of Photoshop. So when I open Photo and I say open an image, so if I were to say go and say open a file, and I want to go to my desktop and I want to go to JPEGs of kids is probably a good place. And I open this picture. What I'm doing is I'm opening up this JPEG inside of Photoshop. Anything I do to this image, I'll duplicate it and I'll just make it multiply so it looks a little bit different. If I save this now, I've saved a new version of this photo. It's created a second file on disk. If I open a photo in Camera Raw, and I'm going to do it from here, just say edit in Smart Object in Photoshop. That basically opens it in Camera Raw. So when I send something in Camera Raw, I'm actually doing the same thing I'm doing in Lightroom. I'm editing the settings for the photo, but I'm not actually creating a new photo. So when I double click on this, it'll bring up the Camera Raw interface. And this is the Camera Raw plugin. It has all of the same controls I have in Lightroom. And all of these edits are just in a file. Exposure to 0.45, set contrast of -41, set highlights to this, set saturation to this. And each time I use Camera Raw to edit a photo, it sends it back to Photoshop, but it doesn't destroy the original photo and it doesn't create a new photo. It just gives me a different way to look at it. So Camera Raw is essentially the editing engine that's inside of Lightroom. It's the editing engine that's inside of Photoshop Elements, Photoshop, Lightroom Desktop, Lightroom Classic, and Bridge that does the editing of raw files, and it does them in a non-destructive way so that you can edit them without destroying them and go back and change your edits subtly if you need to. It remembers all that stuff, whereas if you were to do that in straight Photoshop without Camera Raw, you would have to create a new file each time, and the previous file would not be, you could not recover the states that you were in before. It's a one-way timeline. You follow the to the right, that we go. With Lightroom, with Camera Raw, you can go back and forth to the original and anywhere along the way.
Mick, would you like to unmute yourself to ask the question you put in chat?
Sure. Rikk, how do you get this to populate? You had that deal where you can put this stuff on your iPhone. How do you get this to populate into iOS?
So what happens is, and for some reason, I am in the annotation mode, and so let me get out of there. Okay, now I can actually cancel my dialog here. So what happens is that if I have a phone and I have Lightroom and I take a picture on my phone, Lightroom will automatically, if I choose to, grab that picture and put it into iOS. Now that photo in iOS in Lightroom syncs to the Adobe Cloud. If I have Lightroom open, I have it set to cloud, that photo will come in here into my all synced photographs. So every photo I take on my iPhone, my iPad, my Android phone, go to the cloud and then come back into Lightroom Classic. I can also choose to grab a group of pictures, say these 4, make a collection, create collection, and we'll call it sync collection. And if this catalog was set up to sync, and it's not because it's just a test catalog for demonstration purposes, I would have a button here that says sync this collection, and that would send all of those photos to the cloud, which would in turn be available on my iPhone. So if I switch back to my iPhone here, and I go back, I'm in the camera mode, and go back here, you can see all of the collections that I've synced from Lightroom on my desktop back to my phone. So here's an entire photo shoot. Here is a bunch of color charts I'm working on. Anything I choose to sync from Lightroom to the cloud goes to the cloud, and anything I take on my Lightroom camera goes back to my Lightroom desktop. And if I take it with my iOS camera or another camera app inside, I can choose to set Lightroom to automatically add photos, screenshots, and videos from my camera roll. So I can pick and choose what comes into Lightroom from my phone, and I can pick and choose what goes to the cloud from my desktop, and they will actually transfer those files back and forth. So I never have to plug my phone into my desktop to get my photos off of it. They're automatically syncing there all the time.
Okay, you have to download the Lightroom camera app in order to do all this stuff?
Yeah, so there's an app on the phone called Lightroom. You can see it down in the bottom corner there. And it's if you have a Creative Cloud subscription of any kind, Lightroom Desktop, Lightroom Classic, Lightroom app for free. Actually, the Lightroom app is available for free, but the syncing service is part of the subscription. So if you have the Lightroom Classic / Photoshop package, which is $9.99 a month, you get Lightroom on the phone, on the iPad, on the Android device, and actually on the web as well. It's available on the web. Because all of these same photos are available if I were to open a browser and type in lightroom.adobe.com and log in with the same ID as I'm logged in everywhere else. All of those photos are here as well. So you can see all of the photos, the 19,000 I have synced right here. The collections I was just showing you, there's the color charts right there. They're all here. And if I perform an edit, whether it's on the web, whether it's on my phone, or whether it's on my desktop, those edits also sync back and forth to all the photos, no matter where they are. So really, you've got your photos everywhere. I can take a shoot like this shoot I did Ariana. Where was my Ariana shoot? So this white shoot, I can take this shoot and I can sync this shoot up to the cloud. And then I can sit in the Toyota dealership while my oil's getting changed, and I can actually do the star ratings and the the pick flags while I'm at the Toyota dealership. And when I come back to my house, those are all synced via my phone to the cloud and back down to my desktop. So if I wanted to do some edits, those edits that I did at the car dealership while I'm waiting for my car to get fixed, I'll get back to the desktop. So it works both ways, every way, and it works very well. It's kind of an integrated solution. So if I'm on the road ever, and I got access to an internet browser, all I have to do is be able to log into this website, and I've got access to my phone or my photos, even though my phone might be in the car and my computer might be 2,000 miles away. Everything is here so that I can get at it.
Okay, on something related, I downloaded a bunch of pictures directly from my phone to my computer, and the file said something like HEIC, and I couldn't do anything in Lightroom with them. We had to redo it somehow. Is when you sync it up like that, do you get that HE? I don't even know what that is, but anyway, do you get that and
Yes.
have to redo all this stuff?
No, I've got HEIC files right here. HEIC files are a high efficiency image storage system. And essentially, anytime I use Lightroom to do a depth capture, like I did with this thing right here, that's an HEIC file. And it is basically a 10-bit successor to JPEG would be the best way to say it. It's a better JPEG type file, but it also contains the depth information. So if your Lightroom is up to date, it should support the HEIC files. I'm using this on a Windows 10 machine. It works just as well on an Apple machine, but those HEIC files are available and very, very much usable within Lightroom if you've got a current version of Lightroom. If your version of Lightroom is a couple years old, read the HEIC files because it's a relatively new format. This is my other depth mask image that I use sometimes. So I've got the depth mask there and I can click on it and say, this is the depth mask. You can see that the table is the same depth as this ball. So I might want to get rid of that. But yeah, that's what HEIC is. It's an Apple format. However, other people are starting to use it. Samsung can capture HEIC format. If you've got a Canon R5, you can choose to shoot RAW or JPEG. However, it does have an option inside that you can turn on that will allow Canon to use an HIF file, which is the same as HEIC, but Canon's flavor of it, instead of the JPEG. So you can get a little bit higher quality basic file and still get a RAW file as well.
Okay, thanks. You do a heck of a job, Rikk.
Yeah, so you look at it, we got a green ball now.
Well, I guess
All
unless
right, any other
we have
questions?
any more questions, I think we've got all the questions taken care of. I
Okay,
think
well,
it's
you've got the recording.
yes. It's time to thank you for this. I mean, I'm sure that once I get this recording posted to YouTube, our YouTube channel, that it's going to be watched multiple times by me and probably a few other people. I mean, this is just amazing, and I've been a long time Lightroom user and Photoshop, and boy, this is a real advancement in some of the tools that we have at our disposal now.
Yeah,
And
Matt
I just can't.
Kloskowski, Matt Kloskowski was on the call when we were doing the demo of this, and he says this is the biggest advancement to Lightroom since Lightroom was released. And, that's not hyperbole. This is pretty your photos. It speeds up the time and gives you much more power than you ever had to use before. And the beautiful thing is, because I'm an Adobe employee, I know things you don't know. There's more to come. So maybe this time next year we'll be doing a expansion of this presentation with some new tools.
Yeah, hopefully in person.
Oh, hopefully in person, indeed. Yes.
Well, thank you, Rikk. I guess it's time to say goodnight to everybody and close the meeting. I'm seeing some in the chat that we're getting a lot of positive comments about the presentation. I just can't thank you enough.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot to go through, so I'm glad you recorded it. It'll be available, but I'm certain that there will be some follow-up questions and things. I do know that I'm doing this exact same presentation for the Arboretum Photographic Society tomorrow. And I'm also doing this one in December for the Minnesota Valley, Minnesota Nature. And I would not be surprised to see a more advanced class in this available at spring break as well.
Okay, well, great. Well, good night, everybody. This is a well spent hour and a half.
Now I have to reset all